I recently read a story about two farmers named Hank and Joe who lived next to each other, making their living tilling and keeping the land. The land that they lived in was experiencing a drought like they had never known before. Their crops had withered, nothing was able to grow in all of that region. One day, Joe walked out his back door and he looked over his fence and he saw Hank. Hank was out in the dried up creek bed that ran through both of their farms, building a dam. And he yelled over, he said, "Hank, what are you doing that for?" And he said, "The rain's coming." A few days later, Joe looked out over the backyard again and out over the fields, and he saw Hank out there with a bulldozer building a reservoir and putting in an irrigation system for his crops. And Joe just shook his head and said, "What are you doing that for?" And Hank said, "The rain's coming." About 2 weeks passed, and then the sky turned black. Huge thunderclouds rolled in, and a downpour that was sure to save the entire region agriculturally, just bring up everything lush and green again, happened. Joe looked out as all of the rain that hit his fields ran off into that old dry creek bed, ran down and pooled up next to the dam that Hank made on his property, and began pumping water through the irrigation system, and his crops became lush and green while Joe's fields dried up in the baking sun once again. Joe thought to himself, "Why is he always so lucky?" And Hank, looking over at the dried up fields of his neighbor, thought to himself, "Why is he so foolish?" We've all met those people in our lives that live by the Boy Scouts creed, right? The Boy Scouts creed, be prepared. Be prepared. You know the type of person I'm talking about. Always ready for whatever comes their way, right? Power outage for days due to an ice storm, no problem. Hank installed a backup generator the year that Joe took yet another Las Vegas trip. Not to mention Hank's emergency readiness kit, like the one that FEMA recommends everyone have on hand. Layoff notice delivered at work. Hank wasn't worried. He put away all that overtime pay from the year before, and even picked up some night classes, some business classes, and he was prepared to start his own small business. Family gathering ran late, and darkness threatens to make cleaning it all up difficult. No problem, because Hank's there, and Hank always has fresh batteries in his portable lights. Most of us want to be like Hank. Most of us want to be like Hank, prepared, ready for anything that comes our way. We don't want to be the one whom others would call foolish for not being prepared. And so, unlike cool, calm, wise Hank, we panic, having irresponsibly squandered away the opportunity to have some peace in the midst of whatever life throws at us. It's no secret that the two little pigs who built their houses out of sticks and straw had more fun playing, while the third pig tirelessly laid brick after brick after brick to build his house, so strong that no amount of huffing and puffing from that big bad wolf could touch his hardy home. Truth be told, many, if not most of us, are not very wise, nor very prepared for life's little and big bad surprises. Like the foolish bridesmaids in the parable or teaching story of Jesus about waiting and watching for the return of the Lord from Matthew that Lisa read this morning, we are often hasty in our preparations. And when we reap the consequences of our lack of planning, we facepalm and ask ourselves, why are we such morons? Oh, from the Greek, the word morai, translated as foolish in the parable. We could focus on many different parts of this old and odd story of wise and foolish bridesmaids or virgins, depending on the translation you read, and their lamps. But for today, we're going to simply acknowledge the folly of being unprepared and the wisdom of having a plan in place when things don't go as we thought they would be. When the bridegroom is late, as in the story from Matthew's Gospel. And that as those who wait for the consummation of God's realm, revealed to us in Christ's life, teachings, death, and resurrection, and coming anew, we who wait do so with a purpose that is greater than ourselves. A purpose that is greater than ourselves. The Reverend Adam Hamilton, in the book that we're basing this study on, suggests that our society tells us that our life purpose is to consume. To make as much money as possible and to blow as much money as possible. The Bible, he said, tells us that we were created to care for God's creation. That we were created to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. That we were created to care for our families and those in need. We were created to glorify God. To glorify God. To seek justice and to be the mercy of God in the world. Our money and possessions, Hamilton says, should be devoted to helping us fulfill this greater calling in our lives. We are to use our resources to help care for our families and others, to serve Christ and the world through the church, through missions, and everyday opportunities that come our way. We have a life purpose that is greater than our own self-interest. And how we spend our God-given resources reflects our understanding and commitment to this life purpose or mission. Being able to accomplish the greater purposes God has for our lives, Hamilton says, requires some measure of planning. Some measure of planning. Taking the time to set goals related to our lives and or finances is crucial, he says, if we are to become wise stewards of our God-given resources. So is planning. For accomplishing any goal requires a plan to get there. A set of clear steps to get from where we are to where we want to be. If you want to find peace while paying your bills, for instance, the following financial planning principles that we find in this book and that you'll find in your bulletin on a little postcard today may help you find some wisdom in managing your money and your faith. The first one, Hamilton suggests, is to pay your tithe and offering first. To pay your tithe and offering first. Well now, tithe is a kind of old church word. An old church word. If you've been around the church for a few decades more than some others, that word might be something you're just accustomed to. And if you've read through the Old Testament, you might have run into that word a few times. And if you are newer to the faith, this concept of tithe might be kind of something you don't know much about. In the Bible, a tithe is the first fruits of whatever it is you're producing. And in some verses, the number becomes 10%. And that's how it's been presented in the church over the centuries. 10% of the first fruits of what you are producing. And that means 10% before your taxes are taken out. That means 10% before you pay the bills of your household. That means 10% before you do savings or any of those other things. It's the first fruits of what you produce. That's what tithing represents biblically and in the church. And so Hamilton suggests, and others, like Dave Ramsey, you've probably heard of him, that you give your tithe and offering from the top of your paycheck and then live on whatever remains. Then live on whatever remains. I've heard many stories over my time in ministry from people who tithe, who practice that principle, and who say that once they set this priority in their lives, all of their other financial stresses decrease. Not because God took them away somehow magically or supernaturally, but because their joy came from a new understanding of life. From a new understanding of life. A more fulfilling view of their own purpose in this world. In this world. A freedom from keeping up with the Joneses mentality that drives the economy around us so much. The second principle that our authors suggest to us is to create a budget and track your expenses. And on the back side of the card with the principles on it is a sample form for creating a budget in your household. Creating a budget is simply developing a plan in which you tell your money what you want it to do. I like that thought. A plan in which you tell your money what you want it to do. Right? And your money's not telling you what you need to do. It allows you to see how you're doing, and it motivates you to be careful with your expenditures. Whenever I have met with couples who are about to be married, and I'm doing our premarital counseling with them, one of the first questions I ask them in the process of this is do you have a budget? Have you put together a budget? I'm still appalled at how many couples will say to me, well, no, he pays this bill, and I pay this bill, or she pays that bill, and I do this, and that, and that's all I got. And what I remind them is that historically and statistically, that in the top 3 reasons that people file for divorce in relationships is money. It may be top some years, it may be second or third some years, but it is always in the top 3 of reasons why people's relationships break. Why people's relationships break under the stress of money. And I want to suggest it's because their money is telling them what to do, not the other way around. Number 3 is to simplify your lifestyle. In other words, live below your means. Live below your means. Don't try to keep up with somebody who lives in another neighborhood or in another lifestyle or has a different kind of income from you. Don't try to keep up with the soap opera people on television and the sitcom people and whatever else. But live below your means and you'll find some simplicity in your life. Now next week, we're going to take a deeper look at cultivating contentment, living below our means. So I'm not going to expand on that right now and invite you to come next week and hear what the author has to say and what the Bible might say to us about finding contentment in our life. Number 4 is to establish an emergency fund. If you've ever listened to Dave Ramsey or read any of his stuff, you can agree or disagree with him. That's not what it's about today, but he always suggests that people have an emergency fund. That you work on establishing that first if you want to have financial freedom or financial peace, as he calls it, and live a debt-free life. Do I sound like him now? If you want those things, he says, you've got to create an emergency fund. And why do you create that? You create it because when you have that emergency fund and the tire blows on the car, You don't have to pull out a credit card and borrow the money to fix the tire on the car. But you have your emergency fund, and you use that fund. When the air conditioner refuses to work or the refrigerator goes out, the emergency fund is there, not the store card that's going to cost you anywhere from 20 to 30% interest when you don't make the payment on time because you didn't have that money in the first place, or you would have just paid it out of your cash. So you borrowed it. So have an emergency fund. And he says, begin with $1,000 and build that to 3 months worth of income. Now, I want to say from personal experience, that's really hard to do for a lot of people. If you're living in a lower income bracket, these people that are suggesting these things get it. They understand that you may not be able to do that. You're on a fixed income, you may not be able to do that. But you can do something. You can do something, and that's the key. That's the key. If it's not $1,000 or 3 months of income, maybe it's $500 and almost a month of income, but it's there. Something that keeps you from having to pull out that credit card and borrow something that you're going to regret paying for later. Number 5 is to pay off those nasty credit cards. To use cash or debit cards for purchases and use credit wisely. Now, I want to say to you that yes, credit cards can be nasty and they can cause you all kinds of problems in your life. And if managed wisely and well, can be a benefit at the same time. But you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to have the commitment and discipline to do what you're doing. So if you're going to use it, if it's a rewards card, because that's all the rave now, right? Right? My credit card is a rewards card. In my pocket, it's from Kroger. It's from Kroger. And when I buy stuff with that card, all of my purchases through the week and through the month that I only buy on our budget, and I pay it off at the end of the month, paying no interest or fees, then every quarter, Kroger sends me checks for free groceries. For free groceries. If you run out and get a Kroger credit card today, I expect a commission on that sale. But what I'm saying is, yes, you can use them wisely and to your benefit. And to your benefit. But it takes commitment. And it takes planning. That budget, it takes having that emergency fund, it takes not taking that card out and saying, well, I know this really isn't in the budget this month, but I just got to have it. You know, it's Super Bowl week and they're selling those big screen TVs. I mean, I know I got a 42-inch, but this 46-inch is going to be so much better, right? You got to resist those kinds of things. That's when you pull out the debit card, if you're really on a budget and you've got that money thing like that set up. You've got to know that you can pay that off at the end of the month, because as soon as you start paying interest, that big sale that you just participated in went out the window because you just paid more for it than you could have walked in and paid cash when it wasn't on sale. So it takes wisdom and planning. It takes wisdom and planning. But if you have store credit cards that you're carrying balances on, they suggest get rid of those balances, pay those down, cut up those cards, and quit using those cards if they're costing you interest and fees year after year after year. Why do they suggest that? Because when you do that, that money that you're paying on those fees and on that interest that's making somebody else a profit, that money then is not telling you what to do anymore. You can tell that money what to do. Things like savings, things like retirement planning, things like giving to your church or charity or helping somebody else. Making some good impact in the world. Think about the interest payments you paid in your life and how much good you could have done with that money alone if you weren't paying JCPenney, or Sears, Kohl's, or whatever store it is, those fees. Number 6, practice long-term savings and investing habits. Saving money is the number one wise money management principle everyone should practice. And yet, as we said last week, the number of people actually saving money is still incredibly low in our society. Now, again, if you're living on that tight fixed income or you're living on that lower income bracket, they get it. We get it. There's not money necessarily always to save. But what they'll say to you is, do you have $2 out of every paycheck that you can save? Have it taken directly out of the paycheck so it's not even in your hand. And save it. Do that for 40 years, it builds something, if you're a young person, right? And hopefully somehow in your life, it goes from that $2 to $20, and maybe it goes to $200, and who knows what your financial life brings to you, and it goes to whatever. But that builds for retirement. That builds for the good you want to do in your life. There are 3 types of savings they suggest: emergency savings, that emergency fund, savings for wants and goals, and retirement savings. And those kinds of principles will help you find peace and pay your bills at the same time. At the same time. It all begins, though, with understanding our purpose as God-driven, as disciples of Jesus who put our service and witness to the new way of life that Jesus offers first, before all else. Before all else. Finding peace means letting go of being first. And like the wise bridesmaids, putting our greater purpose before all else. When we do that, then we will be like Hank. We will be ready, prepared not only for whatever life may bring, but we will be ready for the rain to come. Amen.